In 2020, we find South Africa and our own homeland of Australia in the grips of a pandemic. COVID-19 ravages the world. A tour was planned by Battlefield History Tours to take our countrymen to the places where their ancestors struggled and in many cases paid the ultimate price on the other side of our hemisphere. This tour, as with many others, was cancelled. This virtual tour cannot replace the experience of actually visiting the sites, standing where our predecessors fought, paying tribute to their valour and service. However, in a lockdown where overseas travel is impossible, it is the best that we can do. The map on the left shows South Africa as it was in 1899. Two landlocked, independent Boer republics surrounded by colonial dependencies of European powers. Portugal, and for the most part, Britain. The map on the right shows our route. We will travel 2,500 kilometres. Tour guests are met in the arrival hall of OR Tambo International Airport, Johannesburg, and whisked off to our nearby hotel to recover from jet lag and get ready for our first day on the road. We speed along the smooth South African roads to our first stop, the Renosterkop battle site. Here, on the 28th of November 1900, Boer War General Vigilant had his forces arrayed on a horseshoe-shaped feature to block the pursuing force of British Empire troops. A force that for the first time contained troops from every Australian colony and New Zealand, the first Anzac force, just a month before our nation was born. Rather than attacking the centre and being caught in a killing field, the colonials attacked the horns of the dilemma. The Boers fought fiercely and held on to protect the mobile village that held their families and supplies. This was the start of the guerrilla phase of the conflict. The British had captured both Boer capitals. President Krueger was in Europe raising funds. The concentration camps were just starting up. There was a lull in the fighting at dusk, and that night the mobile village hit the road and the Boers quietly left their positions. Their task, to kill as many invaders as possible, was complete. Our next pause is at Middleburg Cemetery, where many who died in nearby conflicts have been buried. Of particular note is the grave of Anthony Forrest, at 16, the youngest Australian officer to die in conflict. Tomorrow we will pause at the site of the incident where he met his untimely demise.
Sisters, it's the Taylor family for about 20 years on now and off. And my wife's family had no Boer War ancestors, except that last year we found unexpectedly two. One was a nurse, who served in various hospitals, and the other was a fellow called Corporal Furlong. And his family had an unusual military history. He was the grandson of Captain Richard Tasker Furlong, who came to Sydney with the 80th in 1836 and resigned his commission and settled in New South Wales. And Corporal Furlong's...
The cemetery is co-located with our first concentration camp cemetery. After a pleasant night's sleep in Elimani, we head down the N11 to a spot about 10 kilometres north of Hendrina, site of a farm once called Wilmansrust. There, on the 12th of June 1901, the 5th Victorian Mounted Rifles Contingent suffered the most casualties, 14 dead, 42 wounded, of any Australian subunit. Commanded by a British officer, fresh from India, with no experience of the South African War, they were poorly deployed and able to be infiltrated by Boer guerrillas. Some 50 Australians escaped. The incident led to senior British officers making disparaging remarks about the fighting qualities of Australian soldiers. One General Beatson saying that we were white-livered curs. 3 young Victorians were overheard to question the validity of these remarks in rather strong terms. They were charged and sentenced to death. The sentences were commuted, and the pressure by the new Australian Commonwealth Parliament had them released from prison in England. The incident, capped by the shooting of Morant and Hancock by a firing squad a few months later, saved many Australian lives. After this pair died, to this day, there has been no capital punishment in the ADF. Then on to Bosman's Spruit, site of the incident where young Anthony Forrest lost his life. The widening of the N11 and a new bridge has destroyed much of the creek crossing, site of the ambush on the 15th of May 1901, where this young man was killed whilst in charge of party defending a supply wagon. He was the son of Alexander Forrest and the nephew of Sir John Forrest, the early Australian explorer. Anthony was thought to have benefited from influence when he was able to join 5th WAMI as a lieutenant at the age of 16. He was not the only one to suffer. The 5th West Australian Mounted Infantry had Lieutenant Forrest and Sergeant Urjards, and 1 man killed, 5 men wounded. In the same incident, the 6th WAMI, 4 killed, Lieutenant Reid and 3 men wounded. We now head south on the N11 to Ermelo and beyond to the site of the Battle of Ombawach. The battle was fought on the 4th of January 1902. This is just over 3 months before a ceasefire was negotiated. We hear the story from a local historian who tells it from the Boer side. The fight was against bitter enders. They had been fighting for years and were very experienced. Major Fred Toll commanded a squadron of the 5th Queensland Imperial Bushmen. They were deployed on the flanks of the force of mixed militia units commanded by a Major Valentine, an experienced British officer. They noticed about 50 Boers in a small ravine. Without waiting to familiarise himself with the unknown terrain, Major Valentine decided to chase the small party. They had hardly advanced a kilometre when they were surprised by 800 Boers under the command of General Koos Opperman. Overwhelmed, 13 young Australians who had left our shores less than a year before were now never to return. The memorial set in the countryside where the battle happened is very moving. It contains tributes from local schools and the Australian 2nd 14th Light Horse Queensland Mounted Infantry, a unit still on the orbit of our army whose antecedents fought in this battle. The exact terrain the battle was fought over, still holding secrets in the form of expended shells. A visit to Melrose Cemetery follows, where an inspection of the central Boer Memorial plinth reveals that we are standing on ground that contains the bodies of our countrymen who paid the ultimate price. After another night's rest in Elimani, we head west. pausing at Vereeniging, where in a tented encampment in May and April 1902, the treaty to end the war was negotiated. The event is commemorated by this monument in the Peace Park. Then on to Vredefort, where within the crater created by an ancient meteor strike, a young officer, a medic, Lieutenant, later Major General Neville House, galloped forward, regardless of his own safety, to treat a young drummer. At this place, he was awarded Australia's first Victoria Cross. Back on the road, we make it to Klerksdorp, where we visit the local history museum with its excellent display of Boer War artefacts. Nearby, we visit the Boer War Cemetery. And adjacent, the concentration camp cemetery. The number of small children who died in the concentration camps says a lot about this cruel attempt to shorten the war. A warm bed in Klerksdorp for the night is followed by a run along the freeway to Johannesburg. Our first stop is the South African National War Memorial Museum. A great range of exhibits covering South Africa's conflict involvement over 300 years. Of particular interest is the exhibition of historic armoured vehicles, many of which were developed or upgraded in South Africa when access to the international arms market was restricted. By 6th of June 1900, the Boers had been driven from Pretoria and soldiers from both sides were fatigued from the long trek with engagement after engagement along the rail line and road from Bloemfontein. The withdrawing Boers regrouped on a feature to the northeast of Pretoria known as Diamond Hill. The fatigued British were slow to move out of the city. The battle to take the hill did not take place until the 12th of June. Initial fighting was more manoeuvre and of little consequence. The Boers in the end were bluffed. Holding the ridge seen in this image, they withdrew when the wild colonials from New South Wales and Victoria and Western Australia attacked on foot, shouting and screaming. The guerrilla phase of the war had begun. No Boer War tour would be complete without a visit to Church Street Cemetery in Pretoria and the grave of Hancock and Morant. Yes, their actions were unconscionable. However, in war, the unacceptable is often the norm. From the British point of view, what better than to slaughter a couple of wild colonials to secure peace, rather than any more Brits? And our flag is still dominated by that foreign ensign. Hancock and Morant's sacrifice laid on the Wilmenrust sentences ensured no further Australian soldiers would die as a result of a questionable judicial process. On the other side of the cemetery, we visit Heroes Acre, where President Krueger is laid to rest. After a night spent in our Pretoria hotel, we head up to Parliament House. We marvel at the statue of Castor and Pollux, These Greco-Roman brothers represent South Africa and Britain standing side by side during World War One. The skyline in front of the house is now dominated by a statue of Nelson Mandela. Our next stop is President Krueger's House Museum. No grand palace for this great man. The door is guarded by lions sculpted by a European who had never actually been to Africa and seen a lion. You just need to look at the claws. A great collection of contextual and period artefacts. Then on to Melrose House, where on the 31st of May 1902, the treaty that ended the war was signed. A great collection of period items. We drive through the centre of Pretoria toward the Schoolhouse Museum where Churchill was held. It was a prison in 1900. We take a look under the floor where the route prisoners took to attempt to escape was. They never really actually got out, they just got underneath there, and the Boers thought they'd escaped and they managed to get food sent to them, but that's where they got to. Lunch at the Blue Crane restaurant. And on to the Boer Monument that overlooks the city. A magnificent structure. A great tribute to South Africans and the development of their nation through the colonial period and beyond. A great view over the city. Another pleasant evening in Pretoria, and we are on the road toward the Lance River. We paused at the battle site and discussed what happened when this supply depot, midway between Pretoria and Mafeking, where from the 4th to the 16th of August 1900, 500 Australian bushmen from all colonies defeated a force of 2,500 Boers, desperate to get at the supplies. Rupert Carrington attempted a relief to no avail. Relief eventually came almost by accident when Kitchener, having given up the outpost, did a sweep expecting to see a moonscape and found the siege still going. Thence on to Zeerust to find some well-marked Australian graves. We now head for Mafeking, site of the siege that spawned scouting. We visit the recently refurbished Mafeking Museum. A great collection of artefacts and historical documents that relate to the Boer War. Now on to the Boer War Cemetery. There are a number of Australian graves, none from the time of the siege, all from the war's guerrilla phase. A good night's sleep in Mafeking, then we hit the road to Kimberley. Arriving at the site of the Battle of Paardeberg. First we call into what was the Battle Site Museum. A few years ago it had a rather good display showing what happened in February 1900. Sadly, this display has disappeared. Down the track a bit, we strike the memorial to those Boers who lost their lives at Paardeberg. Then to the riverbank, where General Krueger deployed his soldiers in an attempt to protect the citizens who had been displaced from their homes by conflict. The battle was hard fought. Kitchener became commander due to Roberts taking ill. The front attack Kitchener ordered was very costly. Roberts rose from his deathbed to take command, ordering a siege that lasted 8 days and resulted in Krueger surrendering. Colonel Hannay died leading his battalion of Scotsmen in Kitchener's ill-fated attack. His grave stands at the site where he fell. Late afternoon, and we visit the Kimberley Cemetery. Here we find the names of the first Australians to die in this war. Midshipman Huddart was the first to lose his life at Belmont on the 23rd of November 1899. He was serving with a British naval unit fighting as infantry. Sad naval officers were still wearing their distinctive uniforms. They were targeted by the Boers. Trooper Vincent Jones, serving with the Queensland Mounted Infantry, was the first Australian to die in battle while serving in an Australian unit. A great sleep in our Kimberley hotel, and we head southeast toward Maggotsfontein, stopping at this magnificent monument to the Boer soldiers who lost their lives in the ground-breaking engagement. Then up to the feature that stopped the British push to relieve Kimberley in December 1899. We discussed the battle over the diorama that overlooks the field. 29 Lancers were in the battle, guarding a battery of the Royal Horse Artillery. A short walk takes us to the museum and its collection of weaponry and artefacts from the conflict. Dioramas show what happened. This shows the Scots lined up to be held back by the Boers' innovative use of their 7mm Mausers low trajectory fired from entrenched positions at the base of the hill. Agile members of the tour group then climb to the monument that surmounts the main feature. The adventurous make the trek to the Scandinavian Monument, to honour those from the northern countries who fought on the side of the Boers. There was envy in Europe when it came to the British Empire in the 1800s. After another good sleep, we find ourselves back in Kimberley and visit the McGregor Museum. With its extensive collection of Boer War artefacts. And housing the Museum of the Kimberley Regiment. Another warm bed, and we bid farewell to Kimberley and head south to Belmont. Here, from this hill, on the 23rd of November 1899, some 29 Lancers were the first Australian soldiers in an Australian uniform to fire their weapons in anger. From their hill, seen here on the right, they were covering the withdrawal of the British 9th Lancers, who had sparked a reaction from Boers in their role as covering force for Magersfontein. Whilst the railway line is still in operation, trains no longer stop here. Onward now to Da'a, the major rail centre that troops pass through on their way from Cape Town to the front. About 300 kilometres later we reach Arendelle, where a patrol of mounted Lancers approached these koppies in December 1899. While drawing fire to work out where the enemy was, several horses were shot. Trooper Harrison from Parramatta had his horse shot from under him. Trooper Morris from Singleton turned back under close heavy fire, got him up behind and galloped out. For this action, Tom Morris was recommended for the Victoria Cross, the first Australian to be so recommended. The award, however, was never made. We then move on to Gareep Dam, where we spend a pleasant evening. Dawn as the sun rises over the dam. We make our way to the nearby concentration camp cemetery. Hidden in bushland, this eerie monument to so many lost innocent souls has not been vandalised. Then to Kolesberg, where the cemetery holds graves of the first of those from New South Wales, South Australia and Victoria to die in the conflict. There is no marked grave for Corporal Fred Kilpatrick, the 26-year-old school teacher from Carlingford, who was the first New South Wales Lancer to die in battle. The battles to take Kolesberg were fought in the silted seabed terrain that surrounds the rail junction. This is the site at the camp at Sliggersfontein where the patrol Fred Kilpatrick was headed out from. Koleskop is the dominating feature for the surrounding area. The Boer fate was sealed when British soldiers dragged artillery to the top and were from there able to dominate the surrounding countryside. Next we visit Kolesberg Museum. It has an excellent stone detailing the actions of the Western Australians in the Kolesberg battle. The museum also has a worthwhile collection of information and artefacts relating to the war. We spend the night in Bloemfontein. In the morning, climbing Naval Hill to get a good view of the city, where Lord Robert's army had to pause for 3 months, from March to May 1900, for resupply and reinforcement. 500 horses had been lost in the outflanking move by General French to relieve Kimberley. Before Roberts was able to push on to Pretoria. It was a deadly pause. The water supply was contaminated. Many died of typhoid. This is the President Brand Cemetery, where most of those who died in the pause are buried. We take time to honour a soldier who lost his life to the sickness. Next, we visit the Museum of the Boer Republics and the nearby Women's Monument. A great display focusing on the Second Anglo-Boer War. Then, onto the South African School of Armour and its display of vehicles and equipment, often unique. Just short of our Zand River stop, we experienced this magnificent monument to the Voortrekkers, out in the middle of the South African veldt. Then onto the side of the Zand River, where we discuss how the Boers used this natural obstacle to delay Robert's advance. Then onto Kroonstad, where we see two cemeteries. The first is in good condition. The second is heavily vandalised. The cast iron grave markers are worth a bit at scrap. The only sign of the last Lancer's grave marker is the name on the wall. Our final stop is the Kroonstad Concentration Camp Cemetery. We drive into Johannesburg for a good night's sleep and our flights home. Let's hope that next year you won't just get a slideshow, you'll be able to do it for real. Make your booking now.